All right, Rav Mathil, teach us, my friend.
Okay, Rosh Hashiva. Let's. Okay, this is good. Okay, so this is just random stuff that I. Okay, wait a second. Okay, so um, let's. Okay, this is an issue here. Just make it bigger. Actually, okay, stipulating against work on Shabbos. Okay, if an employer stipulated that a non-Jewish employee must not work on Shabbos, but they violate the agreement, then one, he may live in the house of the Jew. B, if he catches them, if he is working on Shabbos, he must. If he catches a non-Jew working on Shabbos, he must protest and attempt to stop them in order to present Moed Ayin, but he need not offer them extra money to stop. So if he failed to stipulate that they shouldn't work on Shabbos, then he's responsible for their working on Shabbos, and he might have to offer extra money for them to stop as an incentive. Okay. Then he goes on to something. Okay. Long-term employee is hired for a specific task. If a non-Jew is hired on a yearly basis to perform a specific task as the need arises, such as sewing or writing letters, some opinions permit him to work on Shabbos at his own discretion, provided that A, the Jew does not require him to do so, and B, he does not work from the Jew's home. Some opinions forbid this. It is best to be stringent if there's a steady stream of work so that the Jew benefits from the non-Jew working on Shabbos, since it frees the non-Jew for more work during the week, even though the Jew would not object to his skipping a day of work. There's room for leniency with a long-term employee whose specific responsibility does not necessitate work every day. Okay, so basically, if somebody comes to your home on Shabbos, they might think the non-Jew is actually a Jew, and that it seems to be a mutar that you could work on Shabbos, and create a false impression. And I think that's the reason.
We were at the end of 71A2, and the Gemara asked further, but if the Bryce in which Rabbi Meir rules that the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold penalty when the animal was slaughtered on Shabbat or for idol worship refers to where he slaughtered it through another person, an agent, then what's the reason of the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Meir and exempt the thief from the payment? So what it's actually saying is, if the Bryce refers to where the thief slaughtered the animal himself, and Rabbi Meir rules that he's obligated to payment despite the fact that he's simultaneously liable to execution, then we can obviously understand the view of the sages, because they subscribe to the law of he stands liable to the penalty greater than it. Kim Leipati Rabbi Minay. But here we're talking, the Bryce is referring to where the thief slaughtered the animal through an agent. And therefore, that's why there's no Kim Leipati Rabbi Minay. And Rabbi Meir says there is a fourfold or fivefold payment. And he's generally much stricter than the sages. But in this case, the sages couldn't exempt the thief from the payment because Kim Leib B'di Rabbi Minay wouldn't kick in for the thief. Basically, the agent gets killed and the thief still is eligible to make that payment. So we don't understand where the sages are coming from. So the Gemara answers, they said, who's the author of the opinion attributed by the Brisa to the sages? In other words, who are these so-called sages? It's none other than Rabbi Shimon himself, okay, who says that a slaughter that is not fit, in other words, that does not render the animal fit for human consumption in terms of eating it, is not termed a slaughter. So we're saying that that is the reason that there's no four or fivefold eligibility according to the sages, because who's the sages in this case? It's Rabbi Shimon himself. And you saw from the last two lines of the Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon exempts a thief who slaughters the stolen animal if, number one, it's found to be a treifa, In other words, the person couldn't consume it anyway, the original offering. Or if it was a non-consecrated animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard, because he maintains that a slaughter that does not render the animal fit for consumption is not considered a slaughter with respect to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So it has to be eligible for a Jew to eat. And then Gavin asked a great question last time. He said, well, that kind of seems unfair. And I said, Gav, not when it comes to the fact that the thief isn't off the hook, because what happens is he still has to pay the kefil payment, which is if the ox is worth 100 zuz, he pays 100 zuz for the ox as compensation for having it slaughtered, and he pays another 100 as a penalty. So the owner is more than compensated, and he agreed. So as far as that's concerned, anything that's not fit for human consumption that is prevented by Torah law, no eligibility, even according to the sages, and in this case, Rabbi Shimon representing them for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Kev, are you with us? Okay, so the Gemara persists. They said this explanation of why the sages, in other words, in this case, the major sage that's speaking on behalf of the sages, who is Rav Shimon, exempt a thief from the 4-fold or 5-fold payment is well with regard to the case of the animal that was slaughtered for idol worship and the case of the ox condemned to be stoned, because then it's considered a slaughter that is unfit. Okay. In other words, an ox slaughtered after it was condemned to stoning by the court is forbidden for Jewish consumption or for any other benefit. Okay. And an animal slaughtered for idol worship is likewise forbidden for consumption or for any other benefit. But the main question that arises is this doesn't explain why the sages exempt the thief from the 4-fold or 5-fold penalty in the Bryce's first case, where the agent slaughters the animal on Shabbat. For a slaughter performed on Shabbat is a valid slaughter. Now, guys, I don't know about you, but this to me was an absolute surprise.
Me
too.
Maybe because sacrifices would carbonate on the Shabbos, korbanot. Maybe that's why.
Well, I thought that point that you brought the other day, which is this point, is a very good one. And there might have been a point in history where before there was a temple where people, as we know, did their own sacrifices. So maybe it's talking about that particular point in time. After a certain period, people didn't do their own karbonos. It was done by the Kohen. But it's very possible that the time period that we're talking in might have referred to that period, or maybe later the shochet that was doing it on behalf of that individual. It could have been. I'm not sure, Kevin. But anyway, either way, it's definitely a chiddush. A slaughter performed on Shabbat is a valid slaughter. It's because we learned in a Mishnah, and what Mishnah is this? This is in Chulin 14a. Now, at Yeshiva Gedolah at the moment, they've been going through Chulin for about a year and a bit at least. And they're going through it in a lot of detail. And that's one of the reason why Yeshiva Gedolah goes through it is Yeshiva Gedolah is a learning institution to produce South African-based rabbis. So they learn all the Gemaras pertaining to kashrut as well as to Shabbat, because those are what a rabbi is going to need, and a huge amount of patience for the community. But that, I think, is a different thing that they teach them. So we learned in Chulin 14a, if one slaughters an animal on Shabbat or on Yom Kippur, even though he's liable to pay with his life, his act of slaughter is valid and the animal is fit for consumption. So I had to actually look at this because I got it right, because we learned that an animal that was slaughtered on Yom Kippur, one doesn't have to pay with their life. So the explanation that the Gemara gave is that you get kares either way for slaughtering an animal on Shabbat or on Yom Kippur. But as far as slaughtering it on Shabbat is concerned, the person pays with their life, and that's the kapora. In terms of as far as slaughtering it on Yom Kippur, they get lashes. And in that way, they pay for it with a genuine, sincere teshuvah. Does that make sense? So, the court-imposed law is different to the spiritual law. So when we say he's liable to pay with his life, it's that serious. But we're talking about his spiritual life. In the case of Shabbos, it's literal. But either way, the act of slaughter is valid if the animal is shechted on Shabbat, and the animal is fit for consumption. Okay, so there's Rabbi Akiva Eiger who discusses at length the issue of when the shechita of a mumar is unfit. A mum is something with a blemish, etc., and he goes through certain details as far as that's concerned. But in any case, the Gemara answers yes. They said in regard to slaughter performed on Shabbat, he, Rabbi Shimon, the author of the Sage's view in this brisa, holds with Rav Yochanan Hasandla, who forbids the slaughter of animals for consumption. So what we're saying is here is Rabbi Shimon is very, very strict. He's saying that any animal that's slaughtered on Shabbat, because you're breaking Shabbat, you're not allowed to derive any benefit from it whatsoever. Okay? And therefore, according to that opinion, Rav Yochanan Hasandla is very, very strict as well. But the rest of the sages are not as strict and say that the animal is technically allowed for consumption. And so in Bava Kamma, the 71st daf, the rules of cooking food on Shabbat. We're going to ask Gavin's question afterwards because Gavin's question was brilliant. So Rabbi Meir is the most lenient opinion. So if it's done b'shoigeg, inadvertently, which means in a state of unawareness, either the sinner is not aware it's Shabbat, his clock might have stopped on Friday afternoon and he hadn't realized that Shabbos had come in yet, or alternatively didn't know cooking was prohibited on Shabbat. He's a new tshuva. So either way, Rabbi Meir is so lenient that the sinner himself can eat it on Shabbat. I was absolutely surprised. So that to me, Gavin, was a shock. So obviously, if it's deliberate, because let's see Rabbi Meir's reasoning. The main reason of Rabbi Meir is that, you know what, it's not really a sin if a person didn't know any better. So then he can eat it on Shabbat. He's cooked it. It's not like he's breaking Shabbat further by eating it. He didn't know. That's his logic. As far as deliberate breaking of Shabbat, anybody can, no Jew can eat it during Shabbat because no Jew can benefit from purposeful sin of another Jew. We're all part of the same Klal Yisrael. Okay? So that is not negotiable. But the sinner, even the sinner, and obviously every other Jew, but specifically the novelty here is that the sinner can wait until after Shabbat and add in the time it would have taken to cook the food. And with that time added, at that point, he could consume the food. So Gavin asked the following question. Gavin asked it briefly.
So how come if the Jew cooks on, if he deliberately cooks on Shabbos, that's a purposeful sin. And if it's a purposeful sin, that food should become asur, should become forbidden. So I don't understand why through delayed gratification, and it's after Shabbos, after the sin took place, that it now becomes available to you and you can eat it, providing you wait the cooking time. So that I find a little bit strange. But
okay,
I think I understand.
So that was an excellent question. I was battling with it myself. But again, if we go to Rabbi Meir, who's the most lenient opinion, he's saying, look, the intention of that deliberate sinner was getting benefit for it on Shabbat. Okay, that was his intent. That's why I cooked it on Shabbat in order to eat it on Shabbat. We punish him. He cannot eat it on Shabbat. But after Shabbat, there's no prohibition. Anybody can eat the food. Anybody can cook food after Shabbat. So providing it's a chol, it's a week has clocked in, and you allow enough time for cooking that food, that Jew can eat it. Why? His intention was to sin on Shabbat by cooking it and eating it on Shabbat. We punish him with it. He's not allowed to eat what he cooked on Shabbat. But after Shabbat, any Jew can cook on Shabbat. So we take the cooking time once Shabbat is out, and then he can cook and eat it. Well, it's already cooked, but he can eat it at that point because he would be allowed to had it not been Shabbat. And that goes with the same sort of lenient thinking as even the sinner. Say he didn't know it was Shabbos. So he cooked it. Now he can eat it on Shabbos. What are you going to do? Throw it away? He didn't do it on purpose. So it's a consistently lenient opinion. Now, where Gavin is coming from is we don't hold by that generally. Now, what's so interesting before we go on to the moderate remedy is you can see yet in another way, Rabbi Meir is tougher than some of the rabbis. Why? Because we look at Kimlei B'di Rabbi Minei, gives lashes in the case of Makot 4a to Eidim Zomimim for that prohibition in Exodus and Shmot about bearing false testimony against your neighbor, and the reciprocal penalty in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19, where he said, what you intend to do to the victim is done to you with the 200 zuz. He makes the Eidim Zomimim pay 200 zuz, whereas the rabbis say if you're giving the Eidim Zomimim lashes, there's no reciprocal penalty. So in that way, he's more stringent than other rabbis. So it's very interesting that you can have a rabbi that, and you're talking Rabbi Meir is a big tanner that can be more lenient in a certain regard, and in other regards more stringent. Let's take the middle opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda, if a Jew breaks Shabbos inadvertently, he doesn't know Shabbos, or because his watch stopped, or he doesn't know that cooking is prohibited on Shabbos, the sinner can eat it after Shabbat, not during Shabbos like Rabbi Meir. But he has to add the time it would take to cook the item. Does everybody understand? That's how we hold today. Guys?
Yeah, I understand.
Fine. So as far as deliberate breaking Shabbat is concerned, Gavin is completely right. We hold by Rabbi Yehuda today that the sinner may never eat the food. We punish him that he never eats the food. But other Jews can only partake the food after Shabbat in the prescribed cooking time to cook that meal. Because they never sinned, so they can't partake during Shabbos. But after Shabbos, there's no reason why they can't at the prescribed cooking time and then eat it as though it was cooked after Shabbos. They never sin directly. It's not deliberate for them. That makes sense. That's how we hold today. Let's look at the strictest opinion, Rav Yochanan. Very strict. If the sinner inadvertently made the mistake, he can never eat it. Not even after Shabbat with the prescribed time. Okay? But other Jews, if they wait until after Shabbat and the cooking time, they can eat it. Now, if it's deliberate, the food can never be eaten by the sinner or any other Jew. There's no eating benefit. But it can still be sold or given to a non-Jew, Gentile. So even within that very strict application, that the Jew can't consume it, he can sell it or give it to a non-Jew. And in a way, if you can sell it, that is a benefit. But it cannot be a consumption benefit. Are you with me, guys?
Yeah.
All right. Does the chart help?
Brilliant. That was a good choice. That was essential for us.
Yeah, it just makes it easier. More some practical, simple. Yeah, very good.
Because you had all three opinions there.
Kol hakavod, yeah.
The low, medium, and high.
But I had to take a whole page of Gemara notes and put it in a couple of fine lines for simplicity.
You know, it must have taken you quite some time. It's hard to make something simple.
So I felt like I was in the Middle Ages with a torch and writing down notes. The only thing I was missing was a feather and ink and an ink blot and parchment.
And you have King Arthur and the knights.
And the knights. At night, yeah.
At night, yeah.
So the Gemara basically, how did we get to this whole Shabbat explanation? Because the rabbis hold like the moderate opinion of the rabbis hold like the moderate opinion, right, of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, listen, you can benefit at a certain point if it's inadvertent, or even you just have to wait until after Shabbos, and other Jews can benefit even if it's deliberate, but you have to wait until after Shabbos. But if we found out that that basically 9:30 p.m. Gav, are you with me? Sorry, because you watch. If we found that Rabbi Shimon holds by Rav Yochanan Hasanda, which is a very strict opinion, then if somebody slaughters an animal on Shabbos, it is prohibited. Whereas the general rabbis say it's a valid slaughter. You just have to wait certain prescribed time periods. Does that make sense? So that's the difference. So that's why Rabbi Shimon is basically saying anything that's a treifa, any non-consecrated item that's eaten on the temple grounds, anything for idol worship, and anything where you slaughtered the animal for during Shabbat is prohibited. But the other rabbis don't hold like that. They hold like Rabbi Yehuda that it's still a valid shechita if it's done on Shabbos. Not that you can eat it on Shabbos, but you can eat it after Shabbos and waiting the prescribed time. And then in that particular state, then the 4 or 5-fold payment becomes, by the other sages, allowed, because the agent is put to death, but the thief itself has to pay it to the original owner because it's not banished for benefit. That's how we got to this discussion in the first place. Does that? So that's pretty straightforward. Okay.
We follow Rabbi Yehuda.
Yeah, we follow Rabbi Yehuda. Exactly.
Damon.
Sorry, Kevin.
So does this have any link to the Gemara Chagiga where egg is laid by a chicken on Shabbos? Any link? Any link?
I'm not learned enough to know about the egg in Gemara Chagiga. Honestly, I don't know, Kim. I have no idea. Really, I have no idea. So, what we're basically saying is that the Gemara says, what's the reason that Rav Yochanan Hasandler and Rabbi Shimon are of the same opinion, that they prohibit any Jew from ever partaking on food cooked on Shabbat forever? It's any Jew can't have it. Okay, any Jew. It is, as Rav Chia expounded at the entrance to the house of Nasi, and the Torah states, and you shall observe the Sabbath, for it's consecrated for you. In other words, in Shmot, chapter 31, verse 14, it says, and you shall observe the Shabbat, for it is consecrated for you. Its desecrators shall be put to death. So what that basically means is that you can never derive benefit. So by referring to Shabbat as consecrated, it's like having non-consecrated items in consecrated temple grounds. Okay, which means it's not allowed for consumption. So just as a consecrated item is forbidden for consumption, so too the products of a forbidden Shabbat labor are forbidden for consumption. Okay? So in other words, food cooked on Shabbos becomes intrinsically forbidden. And according to Rav Yochanan Hasandler and Rabbi Shimon, it may not be eaten by any Jew, even if enough time has passed so that there's no benefit from the fact that it was cooked on Shabbos. And so too, if it's slaughtered on Shabbos, you can't have it after Shabbos. But the others, rabbis, say it's a fit slaughter. Those that hold by, like Rabbi Yehuda. So if so, let us, just give me a second, Gav. Give me a second.
Okay, finish and then I'll finish. Okay.
If so, let us say that just as consecrated item is forbidden, not only for consumption, but for benefit as well, so too the product of a forbidden Shabbat labor is forbidden for benefit as well. So we want to dispel this notion that it's, and we should say that this is a strictness by only the opinion, as you know, of Rav Yochanan HaSandler and Rabbi Shimon. But we should know that it's not the opinion generally of rabbis. And how do we know this? Because the Torah states further in the verse that the Torah states it's consecrated for you. So what does that imply? That that food that's cooked on the Shabbos shall be allowed to be yours for use. In other words, it's permitted for benefit, but when, guys? What's the general opinion?
What's a Shabbos?
What's a Shabbos?
And after waiting the time period of the food.
Yes. So it might be thought that the produce of Shabbat labor is forbidden for consumption, even when the labor was performed inadvertently. Okay, so in other words, so to dispel the notion, Torah states further in the verse, its desecrators shall be put to death, indicating that I've said to you earlier in the verse that Shabbat desecration is forbidden like a consecrated item, is with regards to a deliberate act of Shabbat desecration, and not with regard to an inadvertent act of Shabbos desecration. So if the person, according to Rav Yehuda, the actual sinner himself, slaughtered the animal, well, let's say cooked the animal on Shabbos, okay? He cannot enjoy benefit from it at all. But not inadvertently. So the Gemara actually says that most of the rabbis don't agree with Rav Yochanan HaSandler, but Rabbi Shimon does. So, Gavin, you were going to ask a question before we go on.
No. I don't get the fact. I understand the cooking of the food and delaying it. I don't really get the understanding of shechtering. Because firstly, you've got to find somebody who's prepared to shechter on the Shabbos. You're not going to find one who's from it. So whoever's going to cut that is not going to be a kosher shechter guy. It's going to be an unkosher guy. And also, it seems to give title to, if you own an abattoir, a kosher abattoir, you can run it on a Shabbos because you can slaughter it. It sounds like it's permitted. That's what I'm hearing. It kind of hears that slaughtering on Shabbos is allowed. It's accepted as a valid slaughter, so they can go ahead and slaughter.
Okay, you asked 3 questions. I just want to clarify each of the 3 questions. Number 1, you wanted to know how somebody that can be a valid shochet if he's prepared to desecrate Shabbos. Okay. Number 2, you said, I can summarize question 2 and 3 in a second question, is that how can this person be allowed to operate legitimate butchery where people would buy from him? Those are your 2 questions summarized. So to deal with that first question, is the fact of it is we know that the whole reason that, Stephen, there's a court system up is that the Torah tells us all things we are allowed to do and not allowed to do. So you think, well, Jews know Hashem, they're going to follow Hashem, and there's never going to be a case where somebody goes to court. But we know that people don't operate that way. So what do we know? We've seen this, that from people, like even people that, like I had a mechanic from guy, basically fixed my car, cost me 24,000 Rand. He didn't get my permission to cost me 24,000 Rand. So when it comes to money, he's not from, so because he let his own interests take precedence. Okay? Another person I bought my car from, whose kids go to Yeshiva College, Shomra, etc., he sold me a car that the mechanic says he wanted to take pictures because he's never seen a car that was in worse deteriorated condition that actually was able to start. He was fascinated. So that cost me 23,000 Rand. Car bought from my mom. Okay? So there are cases where people for money are from in one area and then not from in another. So what happens here is maybe the guy can perform a proper ritual slaughter, and what happens is he took a bribe. He needed the money to pay for rent. He was desperate for money, and he thought, listen, no one's going to know. And they would do that. And eventually he was caught with witnesses. Okay? That sort of thing happens. So what do we do, Bidi Eved, after the fact? So that's one version. Then to answer your second question, how could this guy operate as a butcher? So the truth of it is, maybe the thief wasn't an adequate shochet, but many times when you grew up in an agrarian culture, not just agriculturally, but with animal husbandry, people were used to shechting their own animals. We had a domestic worker that used to bring the chicken's necks and keep it at the back of her place. When my dad went there one day, there were 4 chickens under her bed. So people that grow up in an agricultural society are used to shechting their own animals. As far as Gavin's more definitive question, the person that, it's not just about shechting, they need to know the halachas. How could that possibly break Shabbat? So we learn the rules that you have every sort of person in every sort of situation. The halacha is there to be able to apply even the most extreme situations and know what to do in this case. You might look at us, Gavin, and say, who would kill another human being? Why could people do such a thing? But there are, and there are laws on criminology. Why would people steal? There are laws on criminology. And we are party to it, as well as non-Jewish nations, maybe less so. But a human being is a human being, and a human being has flaws. So what we're saying is here, yeah?
So what I thought here is that in this particular case, right? Okay, so the shochet goes ahead and does it. Agreed. I understand that you can find a guy out there who's a bit of a loose cannon.
He does. The shochet does.
No, let's take it that the shochet should lose. If he's doing that, he should instantly, when he breaks Shabbos, by shechting it, his license should be revoked. It would make sense.
He's dead, Gavin. They give him the death penalty. Never mind revoke his license.
Okay, no, agreed. He does get the death penalty, but his license should be revoked the moment you break Shabbos, which means that's not a kosher shechter, which means that animal can't benefit any Jew. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so we do strip him of his license. Believe me, he just is last the box at the same time.
I'm coming in from a different angle. I'm trying to say that actual meat is not kosher.
So you would say that meat is prohibited, but if we go again, I'm going to just
and it's not kosher. It's definitely not kosher, in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
I hear you, but if you have a look here, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. We have to then go with the general opinion, which says, if it was done deliberately, this is Rabbi Yehuda, we hold by him, the sinner may never eat the food again. Well, he's not going to if he's dead.
He's not going to.
But the sinner can never slaughter.
He might request that as his last meal, though.
So anyway, hang on, guys. The sinner here can never slaughter an animal again, that's for sure. But other Jews can only partake of it afterwards. Now, all we are saying is maybe when a Jew loses his life on an issue, as a sensitivity point of view, Gavin, we learned in Sanhedrin that you wouldn't be able to get benefit. That's why when somebody commits a bestiality act, we stone the animal. What did the animal do wrong? It's not that. It's the fact that people would say, oh, do you remember David Chaim? Not me. Let's not use my. Let's use the word Yonko Schmidt. So Yonko Schmidt, do you know, he spent quality time with that animal. Do you know what he did? He serenaded it. He put on music and lights and candles, and he had to play with that sheep. You know. So in Australia, it's not even something to talk about, but here it is.
There are Jewish farmers in Australia.
So what happens is, guys, we kill the animal so that there's no gossip. So we don't obviously eat the animal because that animal was involved in bestiality and it cost somebody their life. We don't get benefit. Gavin is completely right. But why we say if it's a valid slaughter or not is because technically if it is a valid slaughter, even if we don't eat it, we make the thief that paid the agent to slaughter the animal pay the 4 or 5-fold to the original owner. So it's valid in the sense that it's not the original owner's fault. And since it's not the original owner's fault, it's still considered a legitimate hechsher and it's not prohibited after Shabbos by the other Jews and not the sinner partaking of the animal. So in that case, even though other Jews would not partake in it from a sensitivity point of view and it would be prohibited, we shouldn't punish the original owner. And since in that particular case with the original owner, it's not considered, if it was, in other words, not a valid slaughter, the original owner wouldn't get a 4- or 5-fold compensation, because even the original owner couldn't get benefit from it. But since it is a valid slaughter, nobody eats the animal. We could give it, I suppose, to dogs or whatever the case may be. I don't even think you can sell it to a non-Jew. But the original owner, it's still his animal with validity, and therefore is entitled to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for the thief, even though the thief's agent gets put to death, Gavin. That's the point.
I get that. Thank you.
All right. So I tell you what, guys, we've done enough for tonight.
Damon, so just go back there. You're talking about an agent. The agent slaughtered the animal on the behalf of the thief, or what?
Yeah. Because what we actually said originally was as follows, right? Is that there was a discussion with Rav who said, because remember there was a case, can it be that the agent sins by slaughtering the stolen animal and that the thief is punished for the 4-fold or 5-fold payment? Because we know that the agent gets punished and a person doesn't get punished for hiring the hitman. So why is in this case the thief punished? Because, do you remember that law, guys? There is no agency to commit an act of transgression. So that is, a person commissioned to commit a transgression is not considered to be acting as an agent of the principle, but he's been acting on his own. So if a hitman for a mafia boss carries out a murder, as he is responsible for the misdeed and gets the death penalty, and the hitman gets the mafia boss gets punished in the next world, but because he didn't directly kill the guy, even in secular law, they can't nab him for the crime. So that's what the Gemara is asking, is how can, if you a thief hire an agent, the thief end up paying the 4 or 5-fold, Kevin, payment, because he never killed the animal. He never slaughtered the animal. Do you get what I'm saying? So we're saying in this case it's different. Why? Remember we learned yesterday, Kevin, Rava said, while it's true that in the general sense, one is not liable for a transgression committed by his agent, here with respect to the 4-fold and 5-fold payment, it's different. Why? Because the pasuk states, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, by juxtaposing the act of slaughtering and selling, the verse indicates a comparison between the two acts. Just as a thief brings about the sale of an animal only through the involvement of another person besides himself. In other words, the thief is the seller and there has to be a buyer. Just like there are two people involved in that transaction, so too with the act of slaughter, when there are two people, the person doing the slaughtering who knows what he's doing and the thief, in that particular case, you make the buyer responsible as well as the thief who's selling the item responsible. Here, the slaughterer who's the agent as well as the thief, both are responsible. But because the agent actually did the slaughter, we give him the death penalty because he broke Shabbat. But we give the thief the 4 or 5-fold payment, because we also learned in the Academy of Yishmael there was that extra word or, which means it was superfluous, and it went to include the sale through an agent in the law of liability to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. And the Academy of Chizkiah taught the same thing. It used the word instead, tachat, to teach us to include the slaughter or sale through an agent. In this case, the law of liability to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment is both responsible through your agent. You generally don't get punished because of your agent. In this case, you do. Because in order to be a seller as a thief, you need a buyer. So they're both responsible. And in order to be a thief and then have it slaughtered, you need a shochet. So generally, the actual principle isn't liable, his agent is. But in this case, it takes two to tango. That's the answer to your question, Kevin.
Whereas in normal cases, if it was the thief did all the action, he'd only have one punishment, one of those two.
No, yes, you only have one, correct, because he gets the death penalty, the thief, so the 4 or 5-fold penalty is waived. In a case of Yom Kippur, where it's lashes for slaughtering an animal on Yom Kippur, according to Rabbi Meir, he gets lashes and he has to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. According to the sages, lashes is worse, and we forego the 4 or 5-fold payment. Kimle b'di Rabbi Minay, we only give him the greater penalty. Yeah.
Okay, so Damon, what time tomorrow?
Okay, one question. Stephen, if you've got something to teach us, we've got 8 minutes left.
Yeah, great.
The Pasha Shiur, which we'd love to include in the Shiur. So use this as an opportunity.
It's a great idea. Let's go.
All right, 8 minutes, okay.
And then do this for the benefit of both your parents on the Shiur.
Sure, yes.
Please say Hebrew name, so we can include that in
Moshe and Insects and Svi.
Okay.
Maybe 8 minutes, all right. Okay, Parshas
7 minutes.
Hard. Okay. All right. Above nature's limitations. Now shall command a blessing for you in the 6 years. It talks about the Shemitah, and it will yield a crop sufficient for the 3-year period. The Jewish farmer in the Holy Land is commanded to give the land a rest during the sabbatical year. Like we rest every week for Shabbos, so the land's also got to rest. But it's actually this year's our Shemitah year for us in day 2. In turn, Hashem promises a triple yield for the 6th-year crop, enough grain for the latter part of the 6th year. For the sabbatical year, when planting and working the soil is forbidden. For the 8th year, while the new grain is growing, and for the first part of the 9th year, until the Omer offering on the 16th of Nisan, the new grain is permitted. Why does Hashem use such stern language when he promises, I shall command my blessing? Wouldn't it appear more logical that Hashem would say something more delicate, such as I shall bestow my blessing? The explanation of this question is surprisingly simple. Nature and the natural functioning of creations are instilled within every creation. Yet nature is nothing but a tool in Hashem's hands, the normal mode that Hashem uses to run the world. Hashem can override nature wherever and whenever he desires by issuing a special command. As a general rule, the land gives a normal yield, plus or minus 30%, but a guaranteed triple yield at the exact time of the post-sabbatical year requires that Hashem give a special command. Therefore, Hashem says that he'll command his blessing. In other words, Hashem performs a special miracle for those faithful farmers who fear his holy name. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches that both prayer and trust in Hashem also elevate a person above the limitations of nature, especially in the land of Israel. Prayer, explains Rabbi Nachman, is the expression of emunah, or complete faith that Hashem renews the world each day as he wishes. Therefore, by way of prayer, one can effect miracles above the level of nature. Israel is the land of emunah and prayer, and is therefore conducive to miracles. Also, Rabbi Nachman remarks that by trusting Hashem, in other words, by looking to Hashem for all of one's needs, one receives abundance and sustenance exactly at the right time. The concept also that defines nature. Practically, this means that even though payday is a week away, by prayer and trust, the person can receive whatever he or she needs right now. Let's see an eye-opening detail on this week's Torah reading. Hashem says, I shall command my blessing. Only after the Torah chastises the skeptical farmer that lacks trust in Hashem and asks, what will we eat in the 7th year? If the farmer would have listened to Rabbi Nachman's advice and would have prayed to Hashem and trusted in him, then Hashem wouldn't have had to override nature and command the blessing of a triple yield. The farmer's prayers and trust in Hashem alone would have been sufficient to evoke the miracle of a triple yield. All he has to do is ask his benevolent Father in heaven and trust in him. With Hashem's guidance, the following parable will make the concepts of prayer and trust easy to understand. The great king reigned over 127 countries. His wealth was unfathomable. If all the trees in the forest were pens and all the water in the rivers were ink, they couldn't list all their king's riches. Yet the king had a full measure of sorrow in life. His beloved only son had disappeared from the palace, and no one had any indication as to his whereabouts. On a certain occasion, the king sent one of his messengers on a special mission to a faraway land. After meeting with the loyal dignitaries, the minister took a stroll through one of the foreign city's picturesque parks. He saw a familiar-looking figure lying on a bench. Where on earth have I seen a beggar before? The minister pondered. He stepped closer for a better look. A young man in tattered clothes, torn shoes, and a matted blonde hair that hadn't seen a bar of soap in weeks. Looked up at him sheepishly. You're the prince, exclaimed the minister. You can't fool me. I recognize you. Good Gramanor, what are you doing here? Embarrassed, the prince answered, I came here in search of a livelihood, a means of sustenance. I haven't seemed to find much success. As a matter of fact, I'm flat broke. Are you daft? Thundered the minister. Your father, the king, is the richest man on earth. He's been looking for you out everywhere. He misses you so much. He can give you anything and everything you need with a single command. The skeptic, pea-brained prince interjected. But how do I know that my father will give me anything to eat or to wear? He's a king and he runs the entire kingdom. How do I know he cares about me? Dimwit, yelled the minister. You're his only son. He loves you more than anyone else. Have you ever asked him for what you need? No, answered the prince. I never had the time. As ludicrous as the above parable may seem, it describes many of us to a T. Rather than asking our beloved and Father in heaven for all our needs, we exert all types of needless energies, running all over the place, trying to scrape together living. Hashem is more than happy to provide whatever we need exactly when we need it. But Hashem wants us to learn, for the ultimate good of our souls, prayer, faith, and trust. The triple-pronged spiritual power of prayer, faith, and trust is capable of invoking tremendous abundance, to the extent that Hashem sends a trusting person's sustenance right to his or her doorstep, enabling them to concentrate on Torah learning and the performance of Torah's commandments. The fact that for centuries in Jewish history, to this very day, farmers in the land of Israel can utilize the sabbatical year to sit in the house of study is proof that Hashem overrides any laws and limitations of nature to feed and sustain his beloved children. By virtue of prayer and trust, may we all merit an abundance of spiritual and material blessings always. Amen.
Good.
Stephen. What time tomorrow, guys? Quickly, what time are we doing tomorrow? Gavin?
Is it?
Well, we have to do it, Kev. What time is after Mariv? We have to do it in the evening. We don't.
Unless I do Mariv earlier and we can do it early.